There's a funny quote from Men in Black. I don't know if you ever saw that movie.
Yeah.
But there's a part where Jay and Kay are on a bench, and Kay says to Jay, it's that one quote where he says, like, a person is smart, but people are dumb. And then, like, they panic and they're dangerous and they do stupid stuff. And yeah, for some reason, like, a whole bunch of people together, the social dynamics of everything, just everything changes so dramatically. And you can get, like, some individual person that is normally sane and rational and capable of thinking things through, but when you start getting groups of people together and stuff goes on, like, people just get insane very quickly and very unpredictably. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's something to that, though I don't necessarily think it's as bad as some people have painted it before.
I think it's far worse than most people paint it. It's actually incredibly frustrating. Here is, like, a general phenomenon that is true of humans in general. We do things that exaggerate differences, right? So let me give you a really good left-leaning example. Let's say that I have a city, and one neighborhood has 49% of the crime, and another neighborhood has 51% of the crime. And I'm the mayor, and I have to choose where I want my cops to go next year, right? Or I'm the police chief, right? Well, yeah, you're going to probably put a little bit more police in the 51% area, right? And you should, because there's more crime there, right? Well, what happens when you put more police in an area? Well, you're going to start to find more crime. And then when you take police out of another area, it's going to be less crime caught, just by virtue of having less officers there. So now your 51-49 divide grows to a 55-45 divide. Well, now you're starting to see reality is like, this neighborhood is actually, like, very crime infested. Like, well, we'll divert even more resources over there. And over time, what's going to happen is you're going to have, like, 75% of the crime is coming from one neighborhood compared to 25% in the other. And it's like, okay, well, obviously this neighborhood is fucked, right? Now, it might have been the case originally that there was maybe a little bit more crime there, but now because of the decisions we've made, now we've exaggerated that difference. And you can see this everywhere, these feedback loops. Men, for instance, on average, are, stronger than women. But that doesn't mean that every woman has to be this puny, weak, like, incapable of carrying groceries, blah, 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 and every man is blah, blah, right? That doesn't have to be that exaggerated. We do that. We choose that. We exaggerate the fuck out of those differences. And I think this happens, too, with a lot of people's views of the world. So we get kind of this idea in mind. So for police, it's generally that police tend to be upholders of capital. They tend to be racist, evil, fascist, white nationalist, supremacists, and they tend to look to fuck over minorities and do horrible shit. And when that's, like, kind of the view that we get of police, every single case or issue that comes up starts to become this very, very easy, very black and white. Cops came in.
It's a narrative.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I see people fall into this with almost every story. Now, the way that the cops announced themselves was probably not sufficient. They knew it. That's why they decided to not go with the no-knock warrant, although they changed it halfway through. The way that the boyfriend fired back, it was pretty obvious that he thought originally he was getting robbed. He only fired one shot. He didn't fire more than that, and it's unlikely that he would shoot multiple times at an officer. And the officer that was outside shooting into the apartment, that guy was a f***ing lunatic, and he was rightfully charged and reprimanded for it. That guy was crazy. However, we can have all those facts, may have it be horrible, but people will still exaggerate the story to say Breonna Taylor was an innocent nurse sleeping in her bed who was murdered in the middle of the night by officers that broke in and executed her in her sleep. On the Breonna Taylor story, her boyfriend shot first. That's just an undisputed fact. And very few people actually know that. He shot one round at the door at the police officers. He shot first and he struck a cop and then they fired back. But everybody believes that cops broke in and murdered Breonna Taylor while she was sleeping in bed. That's like the narrative. And I think that when we get story after story after story of that type of exaggeration, I don't really blame like an 18-year-old kid for thinking like, oh my God, cops are these like murdering fascist pigs that are just looking to assassinate black people on the street. When more often than not, it's usually like a little bit more nuanced than that. And I notice this with a lot of kind of the, I don't want to say the mascots, but the people, the martyrs that like Black Lives Matter throws themselves behind. Like, I'm sorry, but George Floyd was not a hero. But what happened to him was really fucked up. There was no reason to kill somebody like that. But like there's like no middle ground on any of these things. Like you have to be like ideologically pure and take some side on everything, or else you like are necessarily subscribed to every horrible thing that the adversaries believe in, which I think is a huge problem with politics. And I think it's like the biggest problem that we have, at least in the US, with our political system today. Problems that I run into with a lot of people, and this happens on the left and the right, is oftentimes people have ideological commitments to certain answers, but they don't really think about why they believe in those particular answers. And then when you start to run into people that are giving answers that they shouldn't be because they think they're ideologically committed to them, we run into very, 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 very big problems. And then so what happens is you'll get people that are ideologically committed to answers that don't actually give them the results that they want, and then we're all kind of for it. I don't want to run down too many policies because I don't want to like get into an area where we disagree and then it gets sidetracked, but like one area that, and I would argue this is just crystal clear, very obvious, and I'll fight to the death on it. So one policy would be like rent control. Rent control is a garbage policy. It does not help poor people. It actively hurts poor people. It doesn't help expand housing. It doesn't do what it needs to do, which is we want to make it so that more people can afford to live in certain areas. All rent control does is if you already have a rent controlled unit, you are favored, whether you're rich or poor. And if you're somebody that's new moving into an area, the chances of you getting a rent controlled unit are very, very low. So only people that can afford to live into newer, more costly like apartments are able to live it, right? So rent control sucks. What we really need to do is we need to build more housing, whether that's we need to change our zoning, build more housing. But instead, you'll get people that will fight to the death on these policies like rent control because they see rent control as part of their like ideological struggle against the evil homeowning landlord or the evil individual landlord or hedge funds that own property, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, these people aren't they can be your enemy, I guess, if you wanted to be, but you can hate them all you want, but rent control is just not going to help us provide more houses to people. But all of the fights that we have right now, all of our policy fights end up being about like people's different ideological backgrounds and what they're committed to answering, but not really what will actually help like fix anything.